Wall Street protest movement in the United States in New York City. Friedman told her, however, they should be occupying Congress and the Capitol in Washington, D.C. instead. Next slide, please, Kumar, to the 3.0.
Sure, I'm there.
Here is the synthesis. Here is the synthesis, driven not by greed nor technology, but by development. Economic freedom, the ease of doing business, global competition, the quest for prosperity. These are things that Pankaj Ghemawat focuses on in his book. Interestingly, for the students here, those four terms I just used, economic freedom, ease of doing business, global competition, and quest for prosperity, those are actually annual indices now, data-based, that you can find on the internet, ranking all countries on, for instance, economic freedom. The Index of Economic Freedom is published by the Heritage Foundation in Washington, D.C. For ease of doing business, there is an annual index now published by the World Bank, ranking all countries on ease of doing business. Global competition. That concept also now comes out in an annual index by the World Economic Forum, in which all countries in the world are ranked on competitiveness. And finally, the Legatum Institute in London now has a national ranking on prosperity that comes out annually. But here is Pankaj Ghemawat now, the year 2011, talking about world global prosperity and how to achieve it. And he calls this world 3.0. So worlds 1 and 2, Klein representing world 1, Friedman world 2, needs to be compromised. No one better to balance these two theses than Pankaj Ghemawat. Have not all of us become tired of the zero-sum debates where somebody wins and the other person loses? If we now see business projects increasingly go virtual, by that we mean the absence of bureaucracy, functionally organized, in a finite timeline, then the answer is to view globalization as a non-constant sum competition in which both sides may win or lose. What Ghemawat is really saying in his World 3.0, globalization can become a positive by balancing regulation with integration. Next slide, please. Inside that book, World 3.0, Ghemawat lists 7 principal negatives about globalization. Globalization is charged with concentration. In other words, the anti-globalists say market integration equals fewer competitors. Secondly, global externalities. Globalization exacerbates ecological costs. In effect, you might say green versus brown. Thirdly, global risks. Globalization creates the anti-globalization people say systemic risks, protectionism, armed conflict, ecological and demographic imbalances. Fourthly, global imbalances. The rich get richer, the poor get poorer. Fifthly, globalization is criticized for being exploitative, favors owners of capital over workers, services over goods. Sixth, globalization brings oppression. Multinational corporations rule governments, corporate greed, country depression. And the seventh attack on globalization, homogenization. Western ways are becoming prevalent throughout the world. Not just the English language, but also products. These global products like Coca-Cola. What are the solutions to these attacks on globalization, according to Gemma Watt? Globalization solutions. First and foremost, he tells us to redraw our mental maps of the world. We should redraw these on the basis of awareness, acquaintance, and altruism. Let's take those in order. So, the second counter to globalization's critics. Cultural, administrative, geographic, and economic distances are plotted out and put into a kind of cage effect in his book. That's where he says being aware of cultural, administrative, geographic, and economic distance across countries is the first key to solving globalization. Third point here, adaptation, aggregation, and arbitrage strategies. There is where Gemma Watt says rethinking our approaches to the interaction among countries. And fourthly, he tells us to think beyond market and business. Gemma Watt was one of the first to constantly call for corporate social responsibility. That's what he means by altruism. In other words, sum it up again, Gemma Watt is saying regulate and integrate, and globalization can be brought under control. Next slide, please. Now we bring to the new thesis a book, actually an article by Joel Kotkin in 2011 called The New World Order. This new thesis by Kotkin is driven by culture, not profit, not technology, not development. His new thesis, it's not distance, which Gemma Watt considers, but it's spaces or spheres. Kotkin says cross-border, not across borders. We may recall here the Japanese guru of some decades ago, Kenichi Omai, who published his book, World Without Borders. All right, let's look inside the New World Order. Next slide, please.
Yes, sir.
New World Order.
Joel, I'm on the New World Order by Joel Kotkin slide.
Yeah, and the next slide, Kumar, the New World Order, mapping the future.
We are there? Yes, sir.
All right. Kotkin starts with an interesting quote from Ibn Khaldun in the 14th century. Recall now, Persia, the global trade route of the 14th century. Quote, only tribes held together by a group feeling can survive in a desert. And I add there in parenthesis, or a globalized economy. Three spheres of cultural influence in the world can explain most commerce, according to Kotkin. He mentions three: the Sinosphere, the Anglosphere, and the Indosphere. Incidentally, my Indian and non-Indian audience today should read a brand new book out. I've listed here on the slide, Diana Eck, India, A Sacred Geography. Just came out in 2012. A quote from there. India is more than a map. It's a three-dimensional sacred landscape, unquote. So what is Kotkin really referring to? Culture defines markets, not geography, not politics, not economics. Next slide, please, Kumar.
Yes, sir.
The antithesis to Kotkin's new thesis. A book that has just come out in 2012, All Business is Local. This antithesis is driven not by profit, not by technology, not by development, nor even by culture, but the ultimate virtuality, locality. Notice the subtitle to Quelch and Joke's book, Why Place Matters. So is it distance versus culture as the key to mapping global markets? No, Quelch and Joke say it's simply place. Next slide, please, Kumar. Here, the title of the book again, All Business is Local.
Yes.
Now the students must all have heard by now of the 4 P's of marketing.
Yes.
Product, price, promotion, and place. Notice I put place in the plural here for Quelch and Joke's say places. And they define several types of places. Functional place. Who, what, where, and when something works. Functional place is marketing strategy. They also say there's psychological place. In other words, mental associations with location. Your ancestors might have come from this place. That place connotes quality. For many years, that usually meant Germany. Efficiency. For many years, that usually meant Japan. Opportunity. For many years, that meant the United States. These were all mental associations. But of course, let's think about current history here. Things change over time. They also mentioned physical place. Accessibility, attractiveness, and convenience. In other words, think of it as the place fits. Place might be big because that's your strategy. The place might be small if that's your strategy. The place could be near or far away. There's also virtual place, online, where the consumer is located. Buy when and where you are. There's also geographical place. Think of this in the context of tourism, a rising global industry in which tourism is based now in Brazil on ecological tourism. Tourism throughout Europe has been placed on familial tourism, going to the places of your ancestors. Historical tourism, even medical tourism. This is where place itself is the product. And finally, they talk about global place. How you brand from local to global and global to local. The strategy of place, in other words, is vertical and horizontal. Now here's the key to where we start to discuss the significance of the dual processes we're looking at today, globalization and sustainability. According to All Business is Local, integrating all the facets of place equals sustainability. So the scene is set for us. What enterprise managers need to know and have to do, that is, what will be the new synthesis. Next slide, please.
You're on the next slide, sir.
Finally, the slide titled The Globalization Process. Here we address the duality of globalization and sustainability, the enterprise manager's mission. Globalization has intensified processes in the global political economy that pose a multicultural, multidisciplinary, and multi-level challenge to enterprise managers. The World Economic Forum enumerated 5 processes that would define the first decade of the 21st century. The first one, the persistence of widespread adherence to economic policies aimed at non-inflationary growth, structural adjustment, and reductions of public deficits and debt. Secondly, the World Economic Forum said a decade ago there would be the continuation of steady growth in productivity as competition drives forward innovation and accumulation of intangible capital. In other words, the knowledge economy. Next slide, please.
You're on the next slide, sir.
Third process, they said that would be prevalent in the past decade, the continued reduction of restraints on market functioning at the domestic level through deregulation and privatization. Fourthly, the further liberalization of international trade and services, foreign direct investment, and cross-border technology flows. And fifth and finally, they said there would be the ongoing integration of more and more countries into the global economy. Now, if you would follow me here, let's go back one slide to the globalization process and take a look at these 5 processes that the World Economic Forum said would be prevalent in the first decade of the 21st century, and try to decide, were they correct in their forecasts? Were the world's financial leaders in the World Economic Forum correct with their 2001 forecasts? Persistence of widespread adherence to economic policies aimed at non-inflationary growth, structural adjustment, and reduction of debt. All we have to do is think about Central and South America to find out that that projection didn't really hold true. Secondly, continuation of steady growth in productivity. Well, take a look at Japan, take a look at Russia today. So that forecast is put somewhat in doubt as well. All right, back to our next slide again, the third projection they made. The continued reduction of restraints on market functioning at the domestic level through deregulation and privatization. Well, I would defy any economist to look at the United States or the European Union today and say they're still going through deregulation and privatization. Seems to me it may be going the other direction. That fourth projection they made, the further liberalization of international trade and services, foreign direct investment, and cross-border technology flows. Well, we need to look in depth here, perhaps at both China and India, to find out if they adhered to these projections the World Economic Forum made. And finally, fifth, the ongoing integration of more and more countries into the global economy. I'm not so sure that fits Africa and the Middle East. So, all right, trouble out there. Next slide, please. This is the slide, the globalization impact.
You're on the next slide, sir.
All right, despite a troubled global political economy, the opportunities for global business managers persist. So let's take a look at the globalization impact. First, the diffusion and intensification of competition in existing and emerging markets locally, regionally, and globally seem to provide stimulus to all forms of technological and organizational innovation. Second, the transition to a knowledge economy promises both to rupture entrenched relationships of the industrial era and open up new horizons for intangibles. Thirdly, next slide, please. Growing economic, social, and environmental interdependence, particularly at the global level, seems certain to compel significant changes in the way knowledge, resources, and sovereignty are managed. Fourth and finally, undiminished individual and collective aspirations, people's hopes for a better life, are poised to play a major role in altering public policy parameters and individual risk. For each of those, I could mention specific occurrences, but suffice it to say, so I don't run out of time here and allow for questions. Go to the next slide, please.
Yes, sir. We have about 11 minutes to go, sir. So
all right,
we can take 6 minutes of that.
Yeah, very quickly, Kumar, I'm going to do just 3 more slides and then open for questions. The
Yes,
outline here for the sustainability challenge. Corporate adjustment to the globalization process and the sustainability challenge. Now here's an outline I would recommend to the students to use looking at any company. And you will find, since we don't have time to go through the extensive 4 case studies I have appended to this presentation, but those were cases that I participated in myself as Director of International Business Development here in South Carolina, dealing with corporate giants like BMW automobiles, Fuji photo film industry, and 2 of South Carolina's global corporations, Sunoco Paper Products and Milliken Textiles. But look at whatever company you're looking at and submit it to this test of 6 particular ways to judge how well a company is responding to the globalization challenge and sustainability. Look in the category number 1, governance and responsibility. Key indicators such as the board and other governing bodies, dealing with regulators, and environmental and social responsibility. Very quickly, the board and other governing bodies. Are there representatives of several generations on the board? Are there representatives of both genders on the board? Are there representatives of that company's customer base on their board of directors? Dealing with regulators. Not all industries now have officers of compliance, but it is becoming more and more prevalent. Finally, environmental and social responsibility. How well does a company fit into the community within which it's working? Second category, strategy and planning. Key indices of A, vision and strategy. Have they codified where they want to go and how they're going to get there? B, planning processes. Is the planning process going up the organization as well as down the organization? C, partnership and alliances. Something most cross-border business managers now understand. Third cultures are stronger than the first and second cultures who come together. Next slide, please. Third category of how well companies are adjusting to globalization and achieving sustainability. Marketing and service. Key indices of developing local markets. B, developing global products. C, global customer service. Fourth, operations and technology. Key indices of A, asset management and effectiveness, gaining economies of global scale, and C, technology integration. And my last slide, please. Number 5, research and development. Key indices of building innovation. B, responding to local opportunities. And C, integrating global processes. Sixth, and finally, organization and human resource management. Key indices of A, globalizing HR processes. B, leadership and development. And C, building a global culture. That will bring me to the end of my presentation. I have yet another slide in there mentioning some critical industries that are going to be challenged by globalization and sustainability. And then I have my 4 foreign direct investment case studies. But I think I will conclude the presentation there, Kumar, and entertain any questions your audience may have.
Yes, sir. Okay, thank you very much, sir. I want to open the floor for questions. And we had one question. Mr. Selvaraj, can you come onto the mic and shoot your question, please? Audience, anybody, if you have a question, please either put it on the chat window or come to the microphone and speak. Any questions from the audience? So one of the questions that we got is related to sources for this is a what one of the attendees has a question related to, okay, where do we get such high level of, this is a global perspective, what are the sources we can go to? Certainly they see those books that you had referred to be very useful, but what are the sources that they can go to get information on these at this level, sir?
Well, once again, I mentioned very briefly those indices of economic freedom, which are available, the Index of Economic Freedom, which ranks all countries in a cluster of variables denoting economic freedom. And you can learn an enormous amount of knowledge about the global economy and which countries are open to it and which countries are closed to it by going to that. And you find it on the internet at the Heritage Foundation, and it is titled the Index of Economic Freedom. Secondly, there is the Index on the Ease of Doing Business. And that Ease of Doing Business Index comes out of the World Bank. And if you go to their website and simply look for Ease of Doing Business Index, once again, that ranks all countries and gives enterprise managers a guideline, really, as to where and how business across borders can be accomplished. Thirdly, there is the World Economic Forum's Index of Global Competitiveness, which again, all of these indices are based upon hundreds and hundreds of variables that are ranked annually, so that you can also get a projection across time as to the evolution of the global political economy. But the competitiveness one from the World Economic Forum, I think, is especially interesting for enterprise managers to look at. And then, of course, I also mentioned the Legatum, L-E-G-A-T-U-M, Legatum Institute in London, with their Prosperity Index. If enterprise managers look at these 4 indices of how countries are ranked, They get a great insight into, how you go about becoming successful and sustainable in your enterprise in any given country in the world. Does that help?
Yes, sir, that's awesome. That's four resources where we can get information. That's wonderful. The next question we have is for an MBA. A person with an MBA does not. Most of the institutions here does not provide an international business MBA. So how can a person through these sources get any kind of certifications that will put them at par, or at least have them that those jobs that are at that level?
You mentioned something very interesting here, Kumar. You notice in my introduction of myself, I referred to, the new innovation we have done in that program that you have gone through here at South Carolina. We now have a number of focused international courses in the regular professional MBA program. And if you take a certain number of those courses, we actually issue you an international certificate along with your MBA degree. So, that's one way, one school has addressed this problem. But you are quite right. I mean, it is very difficult, other than through, extensive case accumulation of knowledge, to be able to, put yourself forth as somebody who can be an effective manager across borders. There are a handful, of course, of international masters of business degrees throughout the United States, through Europe, but that's a very difficult thing to try to achieve for yourself, outside of entering a formal degree program. But I'm a great believer in the cumulative knowledge of casework. And that usually can bring you to a status where your employer will recognize the fact that you do have experience, even if that experience is only virtual, if you will, namely working your way through casework.
Any more questions from the audience, panelists? Hello? Any questions from the audience? Please read. Yes, go ahead. Any questions from the attendees? Please come to the microphone. Okay, come up to the microphone, please. Okay. Selvaraj, come up to the microphone, please.
Thank you, sir. So my question is regarding materials technology.
Reduce your volume.
My question is regarding materials technology. Sir, I am speaking from Business School of Management.
Kumar, I'm getting a lot of audio feedback. If you can repeat that question.
Okay, Mr. Selvaraj, can you type your question? Mr. Selvaraj, mute, reduce the volume, minimize the volume on your microphone, on your speakers, and then speak to the microphone. Just reduce the volume on the speaker and ask the question on the microphone, please.
Thank you, sir. So my question is regarding materials technology. Hello? So is it audible?
Kumar.
Hello.
Yes. Hello.
So
Yes.
Yes,
Hello.
Kumar.
audible, sir?
Can you repeat, Mr. Selvaraj?
My question, sir, I am from Business School of Management.
Yes. Go ahead.
I am from Business School of Management.
Perfect.
My question is regarding materials technology. So in the latest industry, the trend of the material handling can be done in the innovative way. Can you please tell a few innovative technologies for materials handling, sir?
You mean materials handling internationally? Okay. In the interest of time, I am going to shoot that question over email to Dr. Kuhlman. Mr. Selvaraj, please send an email, and we will get that question answered. In the interest of time, we need to move on. We have our next panelist ready.
All right. Thank you, Kumar.
Okay. Thank you, sir. On behalf of KV Institute of Management, staff, and students, and all the attendees today, we have a good panel now. We have a good set of attendees who are all eager, and this is a very useful session for us, sir, and we thank you for your time.